I got my peaches out in Georgia. Oh yeah, shit. I get my weed from California. That's that shit. I took my chick up to the north, yeah. Badass bitch. I get my light right from the source, yeah. Yeah, that's it. And I see you, the way I breathe you in. It's the texture of your skin. I wanna wrap my arms around you, baby, never let you go. And I see you, there's nothing like your touch. It's the way you lift me up, yeah. And I'll be right here with you till the end. I got my peaches out in Georgia. Oh yeah, shit. I get my weed from California. That's that shit. I took my chick up to the north, yeah. Badass bitch. I get my light right from the source, yeah. Yeah, that's it.
You ain't sure yet, but I'm for ya. All I could want, all I could wish for. Nights alone that we miss more, and days we save as souvenirs. There's no time, I wanna make more time and give you my whole life. I left my girl, I'm in my Yorker. Hate to leave it, call it torture. Remember when I couldn't hold her? Left her baggage for a mover.
I got my peaches out in Georgia. Yeah, shit. I get my weed from California. That's that shit. I took my chick up to the north, yeah. Badass bitch. I get my light right from the source, yeah. Yeah, that's it.
I get your feelings so I'm sure. Getting in my head because I'm yours. I can't pretend I can't ignore you. Don't think you wanna know just where I've been. Don't be distracted. All I need is right in my arms. This for mine. And I'll be right here with you till the end.
I got my peaches out in Georgia. Yeah, shit. I get my weed from California. That's that shit. I took my chick up to the north, yeah. Badass bitch. I get my light right from the source, yeah. Yeah, that's it. I got my peaches out in Georgia. Yeah, shit. I get my weed from California. That's that shit. I took my chick up to the north, yeah. Badass bitch.
Now, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I would like to invite Dr. Wayne James, the chair of Gloucester Conference, to have the opening remarks. Dr. James?
First off, that video always makes me a little hungry because they have such good looking food in there. Welcome to our third day of the conference and to our third panel. We've had two previous really excellent panels, so I expect this one will be just as good. And I've also sat in on an awful lot of sessions, and we've had some very excellent sessions. So, enjoy the rest of the sessions for the day. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jihan to introduce the moderator.
Thank you, Dr. James. Also, I would like to thank all of the audience members to be here. I've been attending these sessions, concurrent sessions this morning. Excellent presentations, and we'll continue in the afternoon as well. We have our closing panel, which I am sure that it's going to be as beautiful, as wonderful as the last two that we had. In case you have missed the last ones or even this one, we are recording it, as you probably have noticed with the notification, that you'll be able to access them all from our website, glosser.org, or University of South Florida M3 Center website as well too. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator today, which then will introduce our panelists. I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Cihan Çobanoğlu. I'm the McKibben Endowed Chair Professor at the University of South Florida. And I also have the pleasure of co-chairing this conference. This is the fourth conference with Dr. James and now Dr. Çavuşoğlu as well here. So our moderator for the panel today, Sir Dr. Adam Karmer. Sir Dr. Adam Karmer is an assistant professor in the University of South Florida School of Hospitality and Tourism Management Program. As an entrepreneur and educator for over 30 years, Dr. Karmer practices what he preaches, specializing in creating new pedagogy, filling holes on the shelf with hospitality products, and sharing his experiences and insight with others defines the trajectory of Dr. Karmer. Hospitality always at the core with a keen eye on the community. Sustainability, mentoring, and leading by example in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space are exemplars of his career. Sir Adam opened the first non-gaming bar in Las Vegas, the first certified green restaurant in the history of Nevada, the largest beer bar in the country, and the largest whiskey bar in the country, while hiring and promoting and partnering with underrepresented segments of our communities. Sir Adam opened Treasure Island Hotel and Casino, helped redefine the Mirage, Bellagio, Harrah's, and the MGM, prior to branching out on his own to add hospitality-driven concepts in Las Vegas. In 2008, Dr. Karmer developed the Karmer Spritz Testing Enhancement Method, CSTEM, and a revolutionary new pedagogical approach to teach the sensory perception components of beverages. Dr. Karmer was featured in the Los Angeles Times, Forbes, Food and Beverage magazine, and dozens of other publications for his unique ventures in hospitality. Dr. Karmer, I also have the pleasure of calling you as my colleague and the co-faculty member in the School of Hospitality. The floor is yours, sir. You are muted.
Very kind of you, thank you. Welcome to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Classroom Instruction for Instructors panel for the 2021 Gloucester Conference. I do want to thank Dr. James. It was nice to see your face, and the conference has been fabulous up to this point. I agree. I have been watching as well and participating. And a special shout out and thank you to you, Cihan Çobanoğlu, for not just being an academic icon, but a cherished mentor. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow educators, and all stakeholders, welcome. Thank you for attending an enlightening discussion regarding the subject defining the moral compass of our time, circa 2021, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Not just words drilled into our daily rituals or workplace, neither placid ideas without meaning or strength. Nay, we are to lean on the ideal supporting, lifting, and projecting the pathos behind society awakening to the manner by which all people should and henceforth be treated. We are the benefactors and recipients of the time, intellect, and pleasure of two highly active individuals that have DEI at the center of their social circles, service in the community, and research endeavors. We'll spend about the next 30 to 45 minutes in dialogue centered in the teacher-student relationship, specifically in the classroom. We will engage in a question and answer session, time permitting, at the end of this session. We do have the great honor of learning and hearing from Professors Wells and Murray. I have asked each of our treasured panelists to give a personal introduction specific to why they are in this transcendent space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Dr. Janelle Wells, hailing from the University of South Florida, if you would be kind enough to share your story. It's a pleasure to have you here, by the way, Dr. Wells.
Thank you, Dr. Karmer. Happy to be here and have a great conversation today. I want to go back to really since the age of 4. Dr. Carmer knows me as an intent observer. And since the age of 4, I remember, picking up a bat, but I was intently observing the field, whether that's the classroom, whether it's the field, anywhere I walk into, any space I walk into, literally and figuratively, I will pick up this bat to show my work. And so, I want to show how I work, I research, and I service in this male-dominated and prominent industry of sports. And so I've used sport as my tool my entire life, right? To earn my education, right? I went to college, undergrad, and played volleyball. So I played for my undergrad. I then coached, so I paid for my master's. And then I went on and got my doctorate in sport management. So sport has been that tool for my education. Sport's also my tool for my research, right? Studying these inequities, particularly in gender inequities that exist. Sport has also been my tool to travel the world pre-pandemic, but now I know we can go, we're opened, we can travel the world again, so I can't wait to bring a group of students again back to London or Spain, and see some of these mega events that sport has such this power to bring people together. I've also used sport as a tool to bond. I have 3 young kids, and we can bond over a friendly game of horse, and that is friendly until mom beats them and they know mom still has it. I also use sport to stand for justice, and whether that was my own fight against abusive coaches that I've had throughout the time, whether it was unity walks, what we've seen this past year, how sport has been this platform, also, I've used it to develop, inspire, and empower people, to find what their tool might be, right? Or what their why is. So at the age of 4, I remember I go back to the story walking onto the T-ball. So at 4, I was playing T-ball, and my sister, who's 5 years older than me, had been playing. And I'd always been watching her. And I knew it's like, no one had to teach me how to use that bat. I went up there and I did the work. And so now in my 40s, and I say this, and I know Dr. Carmer will come back to why I talk about my age, because now in my 40s, I still do that. I still observe, but my work will show, and it shows the work for me and why I do how I do it.
Thank you, Janelle, for sharing your inspiring story, and really does get to the core, because everybody gets to this place differently. And one of the beauties of this particular panel is that we've chosen to have 2 experts with a moderator, as opposed to having a larger panel, so we can dive a little deeper into the issues specific to the classroom and specific to these interpersonal relations. And to that end, Professor Murray, would you be kind enough to share your story with us? And welcome.
Adam, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. And Janelle, it was definitely empowering and personally connected to your actual story itself. With that being stated, good day to everyone. And I need to also say, before I share a few moments about myself personally, I'm really looking forward to attending this event in person next year. And I'm hoping to stay connected with the institution, with this amazing conference. With that being stated, my name is Sean Murray. And when I am asked often questions, whether it's these sorts of conferences and panels or just dialogue and conversations with colleagues on my campus, which is Montgomery County Community College and Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia, or with my amazing students I get to teach, learn from, and collaborate with. It really goes back to my father. My dad, his name was James Glover Murray. My father was born in the mid 1930s in rural Georgia, in a small town called Cordell. The community and time and environment that my father was born in was one in a Jim Crow America. At the age of 7, my father was playing in a sugarcane field. And anyone that is from the South or from the Caribbean, or you know anything about sugar, that there's a fire element component to that. And my father, as a young child, was playing with friends in a field, and unfortunately got caught in one of these sugarcane fires and was had 4th and 5th-degree burns from his waist down, and scars that he had for the rest of his life. At 15, my father, in the late 1940s, got in trouble with the local Ku Klux Klan, and his family, like many of the African-American experience, especially in the South, was placed on a train and sent with friends and relatives and extended family in Philadelphia. And that is how my father wound up in Philadelphia as a teenager. My father never had the opportunity to graduate from high school. My father also never had the opportunity to go to college. My father in his mid-30s worked with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Cecil B. Moore in Philadelphia and throughout Pennsylvania, desegregating buses and trains and public works, and really creating a climate of inclusivity for employment for people of color, women, and the Philadelphia region. My father spent several months in prison due to his work with Dr. Martin Luther King. I say all these things because, Janelle, you shared your age, so I will share mine. I'm in my mid-40s, and I lost my dad when I was 12 years old. And my earliest memories of my dad were some of his personal stories, but also for me, my father's story of not having access to education, not having access to opportunities, really because of the time period that my father was born in, but also due to the color and pigmentation in his skin. My father taught me many amazing lessons, and some of the lessons were that education is something that no one can take from you. And I think about my father and his experiences in prison for several months, fighting for some of the same types of social justice, critical consciousness, and rights that we have seen over the past several years with movements like Me Too and Black Lives Matter. My father also had his first stroke at the age of 45, a series of heart attacks between 45 and 50. And I really believe that poverty, I believe that lack of opportunity and the Jim Crow and post-Jim Crow environments that my father was raised and grew up in and lived in were a huge contributing factor to his health concerns. And I lost my father at a young age. And I believe that social justice and lack of diversity and inclusion, lack of opportunity were some of the causes that caused my father to die young. And I also am passionate about sharing how and why it is so important for each of us to be able to explain, understand, and have empathy and connect to the importance of D&I, diversity and inclusion, and inclusivity itself.
That was wonderful. And for those of you in the audience, I want you to know this is an example of how we truly do stand on the shoulders of giants, and having this type of context is crucial to the transparency and authenticity that I believe are the foundations of real dialogue, which is where we're headed now. Thank you for that, Sean.
My pleasure.
So let us now dive into the areas critical to doing something moving in a positive direction, both individually and collectively. As the audience members are here, everybody's interested in not just education, but this teacher-student relationship and how we as educators can take DEI and have it manifest in a positive way. So in the classroom specifically, to build that teacher-student relationship. So we will focus on three main ideas for the majority of the discussion. And as this discussion organically develops into other topics, we will just follow that. We will start with creating an inclusive climate and culture. We'll move on to reimagining how instructors approach DEI. And of course, we'll finish with creating understanding and trust in the classroom. With that in mind and creating an inclusive climate and culture, Dr. Wells, would you be kind enough to start with your thoughts and insights to creating this creative and inclusive climate and culture?
Absolutely. And thank you, Sean, for sharing your story. And I think it's a great example of just like that. On my first day of class, I'll go, I consider myself a facilitator of learning, right? Now, I do just teach graduate students. So that might make a difference, if those of you that are in this room have undergrad students. So I teach graduate students, doctorate students. But at the beginning, the very first day, I do this exercise where I talk about, so what are characteristics? I'm a coach now, as I told in my story. I said, what are some characteristics but you want it from a coach growing up, right? And we put all these words are coming out, right? But then I also do, all right, now what are some characteristics that you expect of your instructor, of your professor? Wow. And all the words, same words, some similar. And then the students start to get it. And they're like, they're some of the same. I'm like, exactly, right? Because especially at this graduate level, like I'm a facilitator of your learning, right? I want to elevate, right? I want to maybe open up your mind, open up some perspectives, right? Fine tune some things, right? And we can learn from and with in this classroom. You know, I also do sometimes opening, whether it's their expectations, you know, some of those standard things, but there's also some storytelling. And as Sean had talked about earlier in his story, I want to find those connections between people. And so the way that I try to create this inclusive climate and culture is share something, you know, it might be like 3 things about yourself, right? Whatever that opening day is. And what they start to do organically is, wow, like maybe I lost my father at a young age too. And now I can connect with Sean on a deeper level. But I wouldn't have known that without creating this environment to first share someone's story and a platform to allow this open dialogue. Now, not everyone is going to share. This might be the first day, right? And my program is, like I said, it's very new. It's graduate students. It's a cohort style too. So they've gone to classes with one another for years they do, but this is day 1. So some people, the depth might be different, right? But it's at least deeper than what it been is saying, hi, I'm Janelle Wells. Yeah, I'm from Florida. You know, I'm a native Floridian, you know, and so I do create an open environment that allows them to choose a depth that they feel comfortable with, you know, and what's great is that you can see this transformation and those connections that are made early on in the semester, instead of maybe I never knew this about Sean until 2 years into our relationship. How much does that help us connect if we learn this from the moment that we met Sean, right? And so that's how I like to start, and I'll start the semester like that. So it's kind of one of the things that I have done. But Sean, what about you?
You know, that's a interesting point, in fact, and I believe that trust is very subjective. You know, each of us on this call have different levels of trust. You know, some of us, if we were hanging out face to face today, and we would meet and be at this amazing conference and event, and you might leave your purse or leave your phone somewhere, and I'm sitting there, and you walk away, and other colleagues, you come back, and everything's great. Other folks on this call may not be that trusting. And with students, it is important. And one of the strategies I like to use is to understand the previous trauma and current trauma that students and folks in the classroom, including myself, are experiencing, going through, and try my best to understand, learn, and relate and connect to where my students are coming from. You know, I believe that as educators, this is a industry that should choose us and not us choose it. And when I think about many of my previous, whether grammar school, middle school, high school, or the numerous colleges, universities that I've attended and graduated from, always felt it was like a more of a transitional relationship. And I always said when I was younger, in my teens and early 20s, that if I ever got the opportunity to be the person in front of a room, that I want to actually almost work for the students and have a real collaborative approach and allow and create climate and culture and opportunities for students to accomplish their dreams and goals. And once again, Janelle, it goes back to my dad. You know, my dad never had these never had these economic opportunities. I always think about, you know, if my dad was one of my students, what types of previous trauma experiences, whether it's poverty-based or whether it's confidence-based or even trust-based, how am I able to create strategies and environments and opportunities for all stakeholders to be successful in a classroom?
Yeah, Sean, I think each and every one of us have been through some form of trauma in our lifetime.
And, you know, on that note, when we talk about trauma, one of the reasons that I was so excited that specifically both Janelle and Sean were joining us today is because of that transparent authenticity and their willingness to sink their teeth into this subject. So I'd like to get a little more specific, if we could, on the things that are diverse, that have to do with this. It's not a murky area. Diversity, equity, inclusion is pretty straightforward. some people are being marginalized. A great number of people in this country and others, but we're right now concerned specifically with the United States for this conversation. And that marginalization is what we're really attacking. And the vehicle that we're using is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And to that end, I really appreciated what both of you had. I think that these ideas of this inclusivity is huge. I'd like to pick a different word. I'd like to take another term in DEI, and I'd like to, of course, you know me both very well. Both of you know me very well. I'm going to pick equity. And equity in the classroom, for those in the audience, means making sure every student has the resources and support that they need to be successful, which is really what both of the panelists were getting at. Now, in an equitable classroom, individual factors should not hold students back from reaching whatever potential they choose to reach, which I think really was Sean's big point there. The factors that seem to come to light in a DEI landscape are race, culture, gender, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, immigrant status, individual experience, and of course, socioeconomic experience. And if you listen to the dialogue that was going on, this is exactly where you were living. But if we can spend just a couple of minutes, Janelle and Sean, on equity in the classroom and what that looks like, I think that could be enlightening for our audience. Sean, would you go first on this one?
Adam, that's an challenging and complex question and topic to explore, especially in this short time frame. I appreciate you bringing it forth. My experiences thinking about equity in a classroom, once again, anyone who knows me, and there are a couple familiar names actually attending this workshop, which is great. I'm looking forward to seeing folks like Dr. Williams as we continue to move from intro to post-pandemic. But anyone who knows me, I'm a hospitality guy at heart. I'm about creating non-transactional relationships. I say this not for shock factor, but I say this because this is where I came from. I grew up very poor. I grew up, having housing, food insecurity. I grew up, having lights cut off. I grew up not knowing at times, when what I'm having for dinner, not because of optionality, but because of lack of food in my actual household itself. So when you ask a question about equity, for me, it comes to my personal sense of having a high level of empathy and a high level of understanding. I believe at colleges and universities, some of the challenges that we have as leaders, as faculty members, as colleagues, is maybe not being comfortable enough to ask questions and to really understand why. And I'll give you a really great example. At my institution, about 2 years ago, we gave out thousands and thousands of college branded sweatshirt hoodies. And this was something that was really cool. Students got I think it is some sort of barbecue, and they got the hoodie and t-shirts. It was really a great way for folks to have pride at our institution. And there were, following the next few weeks, we had complaints from students that, faculty members were complaining about students wearing like hoodies and in the actual classroom. And as an African-American faculty member, I had to share that in the African-American community, especially for African-American males, the hoodie is not only a piece of clothing, but placing that hood over your head is a place of safety. Safety from, when you think about interaction with police, safety from potentially the shame of generational poverty, safety of maybe being in a college classroom and not feeling where you fit in, or actually being able to feel comfortable in a space that may be primarily dominated by people who don't look like you. So this question about equity is really about, for me, it's about understanding. It's about, and no matter where you come from, no matter who you are, being able to ask questions. And I think for many of us in this workshop, it's being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and being comfortable to ask questions and to be comfortable even developing these sorts of relationships with students and colleagues, friends, and coworkers, to ask questions and be able to better understand where other people are simply coming from.
Beautiful, beautifully said, brilliantly put. And I think that that will be a major takeaway for many people today, that we're not aware of the hoodie's actual place in behavior and, frankly, personal safety. And I think that these are the types of gems that if I were not on the panel and I were a participant in the conference, I would be looking for. So thank you for sharing that. Janelle, would you please add on to that?
Yeah, I definitely echo this. Being comfortable. We always tell our students to learn to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. So if I'm asking my students this, I need to be doing that same thing, right? And I always lead with, like, meet them where they are. And I say that because as faculty and staff, we have a power of position. We have a level of privilege, right? And when I hear sometimes faculty and staff say, well, I have an open door, they can come to me. Have you invited them in? Have you walked them to your room? Whether figuratively or literally, because it's intimidating. Sometimes we forget, what was it like to be maybe a first generation? You might not even know what it was like, because you weren't a first generation college student. And so I really think it's important for us as faculty and staff that we have to extend that olive branch. We have to invite them in, ask these questions, as Sean said, right? And know, you have to kind of know when to push and pull, because some people might not be open at first. And I know I saw in the questions about building this chat or trust, because some people might answer, or they'll give you a very surface answer at first. But as they start seeing, and let's say that you start to build this relationship with them, and it's like, you told me, oh, I'm having a bad day. Well, guess what? If Dr. Wells followed up, and now I see them on Thursday, and I can be like, Adam, how is your day going now? Are you having a better day than Tuesday? It showed that I listened to them, right? I heard what they said and I followed up. And I think that goes back to the empathy and this understanding that Sean had talked about earlier. But I think it's the responsibility, a lot of the responsibility is on us. We are expecting so much of our students, but what are we expecting of ourselves as well? And I know, Adam, you talk a lot about this invitation, because an open door isn't enough, right? You have got to welcome people into that room with you.
Janelle and Adam, equity is also thinking holistically, from my perspective, of the entire student experience. One of the strategies that my team at my institution and our department has started to implement over the last couple of years is we are either designing our own textbooks. Currently, I'm working on a project with Penn State University to develop a hospitality entrepreneurship-based textbook that I'll be able to use for 2 of the courses that are in my program at my institution. But we also are shifting from these large $100 to $300 textbooks to books that are a lot more inexpensive, maybe under $20 to $30, or also other supplementary material that we've learned in this COVID environment, that maybe we can teach some of these courses about textbooks, which really gets connected to equity. Another piece that I wanted to share based on what you stated, Janelle, was that there's an old African proverb or saying that talks a little bit about how a society is great where old men and old women plant trees, plant bushes that they're never going to see really grow and blossom. And that is one of the quotes or proverbs or thoughts that I really think about often as I'm interacting with students. And, for me, it's not about, if I'm teaching a mixology course or a hotel operations or a sustainability course, there's a lot of terminology that we all went to school and got a lot of credentials for many, many years to learn. But what is really important for that person, individual, and what skill sets or what seeds do I need to plant that is really going to positively change and impact the life of that individual student?
Yeah, I love where this is going and where this has already gone. I think that, Janelle, when you touched on the invitation, you literally took the notes right off of my page that I was going to share as well, because that's where it lives. Inclusion is one thing, but inclusion is a word, inclusion is a goal, inclusion is an ideal. but to foster inclusion, you need to invite. And there's a big difference between someone saying, as Janelle said, my door's open, come in anytime, and saying, hey, you know what, David, I'd really like to meet with you, or Yolanda, it would be fabulous if you can come to some of my office hours. I really like to spend some time with you because I'm interested in you, not just as a student, but in you becoming the best version of you can be. And I think that when Sean touched on the entire student experience, bells went off in my head. And this is why. We're so worried about our own classroom, about a certain student, that sometimes that myopic vision, that narrow tunnel vision, we forget that the students are at the university in person or online to have this larger experience. And I think that entire student experience, Sean, that was brilliant for you to remind us of, because I too am guilty of forgetting about that sometimes. And I think that that is really something that, while we're focused on the teacher-student experience specific to the classroom, this really is the underpinning of the whole experience. And you have to remember that. So I think that could really inform us, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I also, for the audience, would like you to notice something. You've been through a lot of panels during this pandemic. You've been through a lot of panels, perhaps before that, webinars, and just like we have. I want you to realize and just be aware of how rare it is for the panelists in real time to be so involved and so all in that they are not only listening to one another and answering the questions, but they are following the chat because they practice what they preach. They are literally treating this as what it is. This is a teacher-student relationship. So I just wanted to point that out for those who are not noticing. And I think this is naturally going into the next part of our goals here, which was creating understanding and trust in the classroom. And I'm going to fire this back over to you, Janelle. Let's take a look at that with a specific lens on that trust and what that looks like, if you'd be so kind.
Yeah, I think it goes back to, they have to know that you care about them. As you know, Adam, you've already said, it's as an individual first and foremost. And if this past year hasn't taught us that, I don't know what lesson we really need, you know, because all of us were going through something, right? It was an equalizer in some form or fashion, but it is starting with that care and concern first and foremost, I believe. And I've always had that. Adam needs to know I care about him as a person. Be successful. Yes, I'd love you. I want you to get A in this class. Of course I do. You know, there's things that you have to do, but know that I care and concern for you. I want you to have a successful career, you know? And so we start that by connecting these things and building those relationships. I always say things go back to relationships, right? And how am I humanizing you and building upon that? And some might say that I have too deep of relationship with my students, you know, but I love, it doesn't end when they leave my classroom. You know, I've been to baby showers, I've been to weddings, they still come back. Like if we are teaching these students to be lifelong learners, like I am, like we are here in this classroom, you know, why does that stop when they leave my classroom, you know, or that course? And so trust begins with me with a relationship on day one. And it does take time, you know, like it takes years to build, right? And some people might not think it's authentic at first. You know, you have to show them and continue to lead with that and connect some of the dots for them, but it also takes seconds to break, right? And we've got to, I think it goes back to, as Sean said earlier, being uncomfortable. And sometimes it might've been misinterpreted, right? It could have been this level of mistrust that came in. Sometimes people come in with a level of mistrust too. So how do you show them, like, no, I care for you, not just today, not just tomorrow, you know, but I care for you as a person. And I think it's this continual process to continue to build upon.
Sean?
Janelle, I definitely echo, and I'm following the chat also and trying to incorporate some of the feedback from our colleagues that are participating with us. Mm-hmm. But for me, trust, and I stated this earlier, it really goes back to my goal, my passion to positively change someone's life. You know, I have not had as a undergraduate and high school student, had the best academic experiences. I go back to in the early 90s, I attended Johnson Wales University in Providence, Rhode Island. And, back then at some point, and, we're going close to 30 years now, but I remember being in a large room or auditorium somewhere, and the person who I'm assuming today was the dean or provost stood at the front of that stage and said, look in front of you, look behind you, look to your left and your right. And some of us may have heard this sort of conversation and dialogue in our academic experiences. Those folks are not going to be with you when you're a senior or when you graduate. And for me, that's not, and I was the student that, Adam, I looked around and said, I don't want to be that person that doesn't make it to the end of the finish line. That's not developing trust. That those are systems. Those are, I care about only some of you, but not the total whole. And for developing trust, developing these sorts of relationships, for me is always key early and classroom student to faculty-based relationships is to talk about closure from day one. And when I talk about closure, I often share that, this may be the only class interaction that we have together at the end of this semester, and in 3 or 4 months, we may never, ever see each other again. But I promise you, I'm going to work really, really hard to give you a positive, lasting memory about the way I made you feel and the way that I treated you in a positive manner. If we work together longer term, I want to change your life. I want to positively change your life, whether you're a single mom going back to school and switching careers to travel or business or hospitality or science or other types of industries. How can I plant those seeds, plant those roots to really positively change your life? Whether it's providing a better economic experience for your children, or being the first person in your family to graduate from college. And for trust, these are it is, guys, it's really, really hard because, as I stated earlier, many of us on this call do not really trust people. Some of us on this call don't trust our family members. So it's really, really hard. And I think it's work that takes time. I think it's work that I think you need a really good support system of colleagues, not only in maybe education or academia, but other industries, to really be able to bounce ideas off of and to learn from. And I think it's okay to make mistakes, and being able to have that self-assessment of, hey, this didn't go great. I need to have a bullpen or friends and colleagues I can kind of say, hey, this went horrible. I tried this icebreaker, it did not work, to get feedback. And last, Adam, I think it's okay to ask students for feedback. I know each of us that teach, we get those sort of surveys towards the end of the semester. But one of the things that my student surveys over the last few years, students have stated about their experience in my classes or classroom is that I consistently ask for feedback, whether it's a lecture, how did I do? And Janelle, that trust piece is really hard for a lot of students to say on a first day. You talked about that, but I don't know, were you really prepared? And to have those kind of trust type conversations. And I spend a lot of time, especially for students that I'm working with first semester, is to really share, look, give me feedback, I'll give you feedback. And this really is going to be a collaborative approach for me to accomplish my goals of teaching you this content, and you to get the nuggets, tools, experiences that you need to accomplish your dreams and aspirations.
I want to build on, Sean, because you're absolutely right. Like day one, you mentioned like those expectations that we talked about, but then this feedback, I do at least one formal ask, and I do like a 4-action framework. What could we add? What do we need to change? And I'll be honest. And I think adding those mistakes, I'm like, you know what? That project didn't work out the way we wanted to. And I think the students see that trust too. Like, I admitted there was a mistake. It could have been done better. You know what? And I'll be sure the next semester I do this better. But I think showing that vulnerability with them is okay. Now, do know that I have graduate students again, but I do believe in this andragogy approach, with adult learners. And that is we're all learning together and from with each other. But there are some wins. And I think I'll take from this past year. I had a course that was self-paced, and I used to release things on Sundays. And they asked in this mid-semester feedback, I had asked, they said, well, Dr. Wells, could we actually release it on Friday? Wow, what a win for everybody. Easy. I could just go into our LMS system and change that. But they knew I heard them. Once again, I go back, I heard them, And then we had the action from it. And so that feedback pulse, you know, and I usually will do 2 in a semester before that final evaluation, obviously at the end. But Sean, you're absolutely on point. I think, but that showed the levels of trust that we're building on every day.
You know, as we race through this, and there's so many good points, there's so many nuggets here, there's so much good information. I feel that it's my responsibility to just literally restate some of it so that everybody's, whether they're just joining us or they've been here the whole time, can really catch on what's going on. Many of you may be hearing this for the first time, but I want you to remember that the overarching care and concern that Janelle put forth and the non-transactional relationship statement that Sean made are literally the same thing. So when you have this overarching care and concern, by definition, the relationship is non-transactional. So they're saying the same thing very differently, but they're literally saying the same thing. Also, as you look at the ownership of our actions and behaviors, well, if you own your actions and behaviors as a teacher, they will be respected by the student because that is a respectful thing to do. Again, it's this transparency and authenticity. And I think you had a good point, Sean, when you said mix in some positivity. I think the one thing that you'll see with everybody in this panel is we are overly positive. Also, my father, to use a sports analogy that you'll like to know, my father used to tell me all of the time as I got nearer and nearer to some sort of goal, he would say, son, just run through the tape. Don't stop, run through the tape. And I think that that really dovetails nicely into what Sean brought up with the feedback idea with the students. And listen, Janelle, you closed that perfectly. It doesn't matter if you ask for feedback if you don't act on it. If they give you the responses and that's all that happened, you didn't actually ask for their feedback. And I promise you the students will feel that way. And now what you started off doing as something that was going to increase the positive nature of the teacher-student relationship, you have actually turned into a negative. But if you stick with it and you run through the tape and you act on those responses, it actually builds the trust that you were going for in the beginning. And again, this needs to be done from a really authentic and transparent space, as both Janelle and Sean shared. And as we move on to, I think we can spend maybe a minute or two on some other thoughts, but I want to have some closing time for both of you for some final thoughts. So let's address what's in the chat. And one of the things that was in the chat was about religion. And I'm going to leave it at that. You both read it, but when dealing with religion, which is actually something in DEI that is a soft spot. It's not a category that's defined often. It's not a category of people necessarily, yet it is something that comes up quite often. So if you would both give a relatively brief answer, I don't think this necessarily takes that long, but address how you would address that in your classroom. I think it would be informative for the audience. And Sean, if you'd be kind enough to lead that.
Thank you, Adam. And for me, it goes back to my childhood and how I was raised. You know, I was raised in a very conservative Southern Baptist household. So you can fill the blanks what your interpretation is, what that looked like. One of the earliest memories I have in church, maybe around 9 or 10, I had an older cousin who was around 16 at the time, who decided to start a family really early. She wasn't married. And I remember my family, her, you know, being shamed, being brought in front of our church, and some sort of process of her having to say how sorry she was for being with child, and some of those components there. And I sat there as a young boy, and I remember, you know, with my family and saying, you know, I'm glad I'm not her, because this is really like not right. This is really uncomfortable. And that experience has really lasted with me of really understanding people, understanding that who am I to say what is right or wrong, and really kind of understanding, and has been my passion and mission in my life, and to teach students how to ensure that everyone feels positive. And I know, I said I teach hospitality management, so hospitality folks, we should be smiling and happy at them, and with some of those components there. But I think that early childhood church moment really dawned on me. How could someone in a religious circumstance, in a religious place of authority or authority in general, make people feel that way? So to answer the question about, thinking about religion, for me, it's about understanding where people are coming from, no matter if I practice that religion or not. But it really connects to making people, how do you make people feel? And I'm going to go back to my opening statement of story, Adam. I'm thinking about, how my dad felt when he had to jump on that train in Cordell, Georgia at 15 and leave his family and friends. I'm thinking about how my dad felt caught in that fire as a young boy, growing up in a 200 square foot shack, growing up, living in a sharecropping type environment. How did he feel? How do people feel? How do our students feel? And for me, I come with a place of empathy, a place of compassion, and most importantly, from a sense of understanding and being willing to be uncomfortable, willing to understand where someone is coming from.
Thank you for that, Sean. Janelle?
Religion, as you had said, yes, it's a tough, very complex, right? But I also look at sometimes what religion has done is divide us more than unite us, especially when we want to label and when we want to type or characterize one religion to the other. And so I take it from a very higher level, like what's your spirituality? What's your faith, right? What's your faith in people? I think it goes back to what Sean had said. It's like, I'm not the one for the judgment in this classroom, right? We have created a respectful classroom, an inclusive classroom. We are not the judges of one another, right? And so that's what I think I know that's what I go to and lead with that lens, and that we are here to understand, take a new perspective, right? They have a different lived experience. They may have a different religion, right? And so I think instead of it dividing us, I try to find a way that it could unite us, right? And find what commonalities might exist across it instead of focusing on what the differences are between them.
Janelle, that's a great point. And also I want to share that I feel like each of us understanding the historiography of the United States, when you talk about religion, I'm not sure the founding fathers were talking about Judaism, we're talking about Islam, we're talking about, other religions. I think that is, we could debate that topic and concept. But when we think about historiography, I'm thinking about Michelle Alexander and the new Jim Crow, her work on mass incarceration. More recently, in these pandemic times, more and more conversation has come up in a post-World War II United States, thinking about some of the racial policies that people of color did not have the opportunity to participate in. But for me, it's really history and really making sure that stakeholders in a classroom, folks that are in the front of the room, understand the history, the historiography around religion, around race, around politics, around mass incarceration, around immigration, and really making sure that students understand too. And students have the opportunity, and we talked about trust earlier, creating spaces where students can demonstrate trust and feel comfortable being themselves and really sharing how they truly feel in a respectful, organized manner and methodology.
I love how both, Sean, both you and Janelle just brought in the power of context. And I really think sometimes that's missing. And I do want to add, and just kind of, before we move on to the next question from the audience, I do want to just kind of bring this to a point. When we look at religion in the classroom, aside from actual laws in the United States, aside from all of these things, the idea of religion in the classroom, from my perspective, is very much like language. And the language, again, in hospitality, if you go to a restaurant and you speak English and everybody in the restaurant speaks English, you don't really notice. But if you speak English and the people next to you are speaking a different language, whatever that language is, you think, oh, okay, maybe they're not from here. Maybe they just speak a different language. But if the people that are serving you, and at the end of the day, teachers are serving their students. If the people serving you are speaking a different language, invariably, we think they're saying something not only about us, but something negative about us. So to that end, I will tell you a rule and a practice that I've had for 30 years, both in higher education in my classrooms and entrepreneurial ventures that I've been part of. And that is this: if you speak another language, i.e. you have a different context, or you have a religion that is the popular religion in the class or not, or it doesn't matter, the correct time to incorporate that is in context, meaning if someone asks something or about a language or a religion, and you happen to be that religion or speak that language, it is appropriate for you then to comment if you feel comfortable in a space that's been provided by us as the teacher. And that's how I've always looked at it. And I just wanted to share that with the group. And then there is a question in the chat that I think is fabulous and often overlooked. While we often talk about the Latino experience, the Black experience, the Q experience, the LGBTQ plus experience, the Asian experience, we often forget and or look over what is referred to as the ableist or ableism in the chat, but those that maybe have physical limitations and or learning disabilities. And I think that it's important to address that in this particular area, because I think you've done an excellent job, Janelle and Sean, about covering what this looks like. And without putting labels on everything, this particular area, I believe, deserves the label it has with regards to addressing it. So if you'd be kind of this time we'll start with you, Janelle, and then after this, we'll go to closing comments. So Janelle, if you'd be so kind.
Yes, and I'll go to it, an amazing student in class of 2016 who was wheelchair bound. And I go back to how much we learn from and with one another, because I probably learned more from him than I may have taught him. And I say his classmates as well. And I go back to where I said, like, meet them where they are, right? And I think of just the access to get into our building, right? He has to arrive to campus at least 30 minutes earlier, whether that's to find the parking space, right? Then where the access of the elevators are. And what was beautiful from that class and that cohort, faculty and staff, is when we would plan trips, like, all right, first and foremost, we were leading with that. We had such intentionality with, like, all right, is our bus accessible, right? What's that going to look like when we have a table and we have a conference? It's not, you can't pull up a wheelchair to a table that already has 10 chairs around it, right? So we would go in there and we would prepare it for him. He didn't even have to ask. Like, it started to be like, we would do it for him. Like, we put ourselves in those shoes and met him where he was. And it was a beautiful thing. And I will say that cohort was so close, you know, and so it made all of us better, you know, but it was really leading with this intentionality. Each and every person did.
Beautiful. Sean?
Janelle, well said. And just to piggyback on that, for most of my courses and the program that I run at my institution, we have the pleasure of using project-based learning, which provides a lot of flexibility to really meet students where they're at. I'm not sure how effective what I'm about to say will be if I taught math or science. With that being stated, though, it goes back to what goals am I collaborating with that student with that they want to accomplish. And it's really the customization. And from day one, I always let my students know, I work for you, and I'm crafty, I'm savvy enough at my job to customize the experience you actually need to get out of the course what you want to. And Janelle, kind of what you shared a few moments ago is creating that connection with students. And, you know, one of the activities, I think remember the first for a traditional 14 or 15 week course, the first half of the semester, I want people to feel comfortable with each other, feel comfortable with me. And for me to really by maybe week 6, 7, or 8, understand what the student thought they were getting, and which allows me the ability to pivot to exceed their expectations when we get to the last week of actual classes.
Love that. Love that, love that, love that. I would like to acknowledge the unbelievable kindness being shown in the chat to the panel. You're getting a ton of really nice comments, and they're very much valuing your perspectives and what you're sharing, as am I. Now, as we head up to the end of the hour, I did promise that I'd give both of you a chance to give some closing remarks. And we'll go ahead, Janelle, if you'd be kind enough to give your closing remarks for the audience.
I would say I use these 4 pillars for my personal values: love, learn, lead, and lift. I believe that first we have to show love to and for with one another, right? We've got to learn. And this beautiful quote that I live by is Maya Angelou: when you know better, do better. We all have to do better. Okay. And then it's lead, right? It's tough to lead people when if you don't care for them yet, right? You haven't learned how to do better, shown them that you can do better, right? Then it's lifting others, right? We have stood on the shoulders, as Adam started at the beginning, of giants, and now it's our turn, right? To lift this next generation coming up. But thank you. I appreciate the time and really enjoyed the conversation. Sean?
Janelle, I'm going to connect it back to my opening statement, thinking about my father, my dad. And, what I would like to share for a close is that we need to hold each other accountable. I've been teaching for over 25 years, been in higher ed for over 13. And, many of us are in very politically based spaces, whether it's folks that are trying to attain tenure, or from part-time faculty members looking to become full-time, or from, myself as a director at my institution. I have one foot of the pool as an educator, second foot in management. Just kind of being able to navigate, sometimes very political spaces. But really, it goes to holding each other accountable and holding ourselves accountable too. I think many institutions, it may not be we're not comfortable to be uncomfortable, to pull someone aside and really hold someone accountable. And think about if the person that you need to hold accountable is someone who you report into, or who is a leader in your overall institution. Janelle, it goes back to my dad. And as I shared, I think about my father in his early 30s when he worked with Cecil B. Moore and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And one of the times he was incarcerated or placed in prison for social protests was the desegregation of the Trailways bus system, which is now Greyhound. And, he spent over 3 months in prison, in jail, due to protesting and demanding that some of their Jim Crow policies were actually changed. And he held his community, he held Greyhound / Trailways at the time responsible. And I think as educators, as professionals, we have to first hold ourselves as responsible to ensure that we are doing right, not by the students that we would like to teach, but by the students that walk into our classrooms. And finally, Adam, I believe is holding our institutions and holding our colleagues responsible, and not being fearful, not being afraid to speak up when we see injustice.
And I think that leads wonderfully into the next panel that we will have, which will invariably and inevitably discuss that. Thank you both. I want to thank both Professor Wells and Professor Murray, Sean and Janelle, your cherished friends, and you did a fabulous job today. I'd like to thank the organizers, and Muhitten, thank you for your work. Dr. Chabanoglu and Dr. Wayne, thank you both for having us. I do think it's important to notice that each area of difference that was discussed is actually an opportunity in an area of enlightenment and growth. Thank you to the audience. And at this juncture, we will turn it back over to Dr. Jihan Chabanoglu. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. What an excellent panel, Janelle and Sean. Thank you also so much. You know, every time I hear a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I just remind myself that this is really a journey, not a destination. There is no end to this. There is no end to learning. And as I listen, personal stories like Janelle's and Sean's here, that it's just a mirror to myself that, oh, I've never seen this part of my face. You kind of like recognize, you understand yourself by understanding other people. So I really appreciate all of you and Adam for putting together such a great panel. And of course, very active audience. I don't know, you may have noticed that we got quite a few comments from the live audience. So it's not just this Zoom. With the permission of our panelists, we've been streaming this to YouTube. Our goal is, as you know, Glossar Conference is free of charge. We hope to keep it this way to disseminate the information to everybody. Without further ado, I would like to thank again one more time to our panelists and Dr. Karmer for moderating, and also would like to remind our attendees that Glossar is continuing with the last concurrent sessions this afternoon. At 3:30 p.m., we are going to come back together as a main session for closing ceremony and remarks. Hopefully, we'll use some of that time also to network and talk about all the three panels, the excellent three panels that we had at this conference. Have a wonderful day, night, evening, morning, depending on where you are. And we look forward to seeing you in other conversations about DEI and about other important topics in educating our future. Thank you all.